Two opposition leaders in Venezuela had their homes raided, and those individuals were arrested by the intelligence agency in the country. Family members posted videos of these opposition leaders. Their names are Leopoldo Lopez and Antonio Ledezma, being detained, and claimed that Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro should be held responsible for whatever happened to them. Now, the family members are not certain where they were taken or what their fate will be, but they are concerned about their family members' safety. These are two individuals who have been extremely vocal in their opposition to Maduro, and these raids did take place in the middle of the night. In fact, at 12:27 a.m., according to the wife of one of the opposition leaders, the time when the dictatorship kidnaps Leopoldo at my house. She also said they just took Leopoldo from the house. We don't know where he is or where he's being taken. And we have a video of the situation. Family members did film it. It's really difficult to watch, especially when you consider the context of this story, but we want to show it to you, so let's take a quick look at that.
That was the sound of the jury coming in on Maduro. So now we know what Maduro is all about. Yesterday we had a long discussion about how, look, in the past there's been a lot of propaganda done against Latin American countries, especially if they were supporting the poor and the middle class in those countries and not working on behalf of usually multinational corporations based in the US. But we presented some significant evidence as to why Maduro was being dictatorial, and it was not just the victim of propaganda. And when he immediately arrests his political opponents after a so-called election, he's making it completely obvious what he's up to. It's not that you can't ever arrest someone that is in politics. Sometimes crimes are committed and there are issues. Governor McDonnell in Virginia was arrested. The Supreme Court then let him go under preposterous circumstances here in the US. But I would have pushed for investigations of the torture and the illegal wiretapping that the Bush administration did. But there is a process that you go through.
Exactly.
And you don't just kidnap people in the middle of the night and not tell people where they are. And you take your time, you build a case, you do an investigation. If it's real, you go through an important and unbiased process. That certainly does not appear to be what happened here.
That's exactly right. And so look, yesterday when we covered what was going on in Venezuela, we talked about that, incredibly fraudulent election that took place. Essentially, Nicolas Maduro wanted to do away with the remaining legislative body that checks, his power, and he wanted to replace it with a new assembly, which would have the power to rewrite the 1999 Constitution. So on Sunday, the government did hold that controversial vote, and it resulted in the creation of this new legislative body that Maduro has called for to redraft the Constitution. They're pro-Maduro individuals who will essentially do his bidding. And so any and all form of democracy in the country has now been wiped away. And the Trump administration has responded to that in the form of sanctions. And so, look, I think sanctions in some cases work. In this case, it's a mixed bag. While there will be consequences that Maduro will face as a result of these sanctions, the reality is the people who will suffer the most are, the innocent people of Venezuela who are already going hungry.
So our reaction to this is a difficult one to solve.
Yeah.
And there's no easy answers there, but we should have some response because this is clearly not right, and it's an affront and perhaps even the abolition of democracy and destruction of democracy in Venezuela. So look, if you're judging Maduro on these actions, you should, and we just did. But at the same time, there's going to be people who are, look at Venezuela in this case as if we're high and mighty and have a sanctimonious opinion of them. But the reality is, here in the US, we had a presidential campaign that was chanting about their political opponents, lock her up, lock her up.
Right.
And when Trump did not lock up Hillary Clinton in a similar fashion after the election, and to his credit, he did not, a lot of his supporters, including Ann Coulter, were outraged and said he had betrayed the campaign promise. Presumably, they would have loved this, the guys that were chanting lock him up, lock her up. And so we got to be careful not to throw too many stones when our house is partially made of glass. Don't get me wrong, we should condemn it. We should also fix our own mess and not fall into these kind of situations. And finally, of course, there's the right wingers who are like, oh, see, this is what socialism is. No, there's socialist democracies all over Europe. They work perfectly well. In fact, most of them rank at the very top of the happiness scale,
right,
in terms of how well their economy is doing, standard of living, all those things. This is not socialism. Ironically, it's fascism. When you say, okay, no, I'm grabbing all the power, I now control the entire legislative body and I arrest my political opponents. That is not connected to socialist ideology at all. That's just dictatorial.
Yeah, there were a lot of mistakes made in the way that they structured their economy, and overspending was certainly one of the components. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like, oh no, that like the social programs were, but wanting to take care of the poor is a good thing. You should want to take care of the poor. But I think that, unfortunately they didn't foresee the future, especially when it came to oil prices and how they fluctuate. They relied way too much on oil, and they relied way too much on importing things rather than manufacturing things in their own country. There were so many different factors that played a role into why Venezuela is the way it is now. But I just want to be clear. I mean, there's no criticism toward the people of Venezuela. This is all about, a government that was irresponsible and then proceeded to compound their problems.
Yeah, in fact, 70% of Venezuelans are against the government. So it's certainly not on them for what their government is doing to them. Finally, I just want to, Anna makes a good point. There are three components to what went wrong in Venezuela. One is actually how they applied socialism in this case, where they did price controls. Now, Richard Nixon did price controls here in America, and he was a Republican. It was a bad idea when he did it. It's a bad idea when Maduro did it. And there are varying degrees of socialism, and they do not do price controls in other socialist countries, so it is not by definition. But that does lean socialist. I understand that and want to acknowledge that, and I disagree with that. That is not certainly my vision or the European vision for socialism. But a criticism of that is fair, though. Then there is the incompetent mismanagement. Well, we talk about incompetent mismanagement. Look at our White House, right? So Maduro and Chavez, to some degree, definitely bungled how they handled oil and the economy.
Yes.
And then the third component is the dictatorial part, which has nothing to do with the system of government, because right-wing governments sometimes turn dictatorial and left-wing governments turn dictatorial. In fact, this is a playbook right out of Putin and Erdogan. And they were both right-wingers. So that part has, again, nothing to do with their economic system. Help us build independent media together. TYTnetwork.com/join.